Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for getting up so early. I'd like to begin by thanking the U.S.-New Zealand Council for inviting me to participate in this event. I also am particularly honored to be here with my friend Tim Grosser, who I've known for a very long time, for whom I have enormous respect for several reasons. One, his great vision about the way the global trading system ought to work, and two, his commitment, his deep commitment to making the global trading system work better for New Zealand, of course, but also recognizing that we're all in this together. And the fact is that the better the trading system works for all of us, the better it will be for each of us. And he has really done a remarkable job at crafting New Zealand's policy, but also he's seen as a leader in crafting world trade policy, and many of the reforms that we have today or are discussing today are in many respects his ideas or products of his leadership. I want to also say that the leaders of this group, the people who put this together, have a deep commitment, and I think a very important one, to the relationship between the United States and New Zealand. And for good reason, because our two countries are friends in virtually every respect that I can think of. We have deep security relations, we have very strong economic relations, we have very strong trade relations, very strong cultural relations, and there is a deep, long-standing friendship between our two countries that is a very important backdrop to all the things we're going to be talking about here. We share common commitments to freer trade and to open markets, and our economies cooperate and our businesses cooperate in a wide variety of areas that have succeeded in strengthening our bilateral trade. The United States has worked closely with New Zealand in support of growth-oriented and job-creating trade and investment policies. And that cooperation has led to very strong results. U.S. exports of goods and services to New Zealand have increased quite dramatically over the years. Commodity exports to New Zealand have also grown quite rapidly, reaching $33 billion last year. The United States imported $3.4 billion in goods from New Zealand last year, which is an 8.7% more accurately, increase from the previous year. The United States has a stock of direct investments in New Zealand through March 12th worth $8.7 billion, and a stock of additional $20.4 billion in portfolio investment. And these are substantial sums of money, and the United States sees New Zealand as a good place to invest, a good place for direct investment, and a good place for portfolio investment as well. Our tourism industries also bring us closer together for both cultural reasons and for economic reasons. I think Americans love to visit New Zealand. I have had the great pleasure of going to both islands and seeing not only the traditional places, but some of the more unusual distant places like Paikakariki, which to me was a very special experience, and also taking the night train, where the train would stop periodically to pick up dairy products and things, and you could get out and talk to people for a while the train was doing its business and then move on. So it's a beautiful place to see and a beautiful place to visit, and with people of great warmth and people who genuinely welcome Americans. So I would certainly encourage people who've not had the great pleasure of going to New Zealand to do that. There are also convenient ways of getting there. I think it's useful to point out, for instance, Hawaiian Air began nonstop service between Auckland and Honolulu in March of this year. And this is just another example of how our relationship is growing and how more and more the sort of threads of cooperation are being enhanced. But on the trade and investment side, our collaboration to foster more open regional trade deserves special mention here today, and I know Tim will talk about this as well. New Zealand, along with Singapore, Chile, and Brunei, showed great vision when they together established the P4 trade agreement. And we're very pleased to be working with New Zealand and other partners in working to conclude the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and I'm sure all of you are quite familiar with this. We think this is enormously historic. In fact, let me just make a broader point. I think the kinds of trade negotiations that are going on today in the Pacific region, and then as we begin our talks with Europe and work with our Congress on TTIP, our relationship, our investment and trade relationship with Western Europe. When you add these all together, this is probably the most historic moment in international trade if we're able to deliver the results that we have all intended, the most historic point in our trade relationship since the Kennedy round. And it's people like Tim and others who've worked on this who I think understand the historical importance of the moment in which we find ourselves. The TPP, as doubtless many of you know, is a high standard agreement that will not only address traditional trade and investment issues, which of course it will, but also address many of the new and emerging issues that businesses face in the 21st century, like barriers to digital trade, supply chain connectivity, which is an increasingly important part of any business in the Pacific or any other part of the world, issues of competitive neutrality, how we deal with state enterprises, how we deal with broader intellectual property issues, but also finding ways of improving regulations, improving standard settings in ways which improve prospects for increased trade and supply chain connectivity, while also protecting workers, the environment, and, of course, as I mentioned, intellectual property, which for both of our countries is highly important because for modern economies today, intellectual property is vitally important to their futures and vitally important to the kind of innovation which enables us to create new jobs and new industries in both New Zealand and the United States. I'd like once again also to thank New Zealand for the wonderful job it did in helping to move the negotiations forward when New Zealand hosted the 15th round of the TPP negotiations last year. Our negotiators continue to work side by side to conclude the agreements as soon as possible and to, particularly in the latest round in Lima, to make maximum progress. And it's hard to predict exactly how long negotiations last. It's very hard, particularly in the middle or even toward the end, to figure that out. But I know both sides, indeed all the countries, are working hard to move this along. We believe that a high standard TPP will be a key platform for regional economic integration, and we're confident that New Zealand will continue to play an invaluable and constructive leadership role in working toward concluding the negotiations. Open and transparent economies, free trade and investment, and sustainable environmental practices will be key to sustained growth in the region, and the integration, the economic integration in the region will also strengthen our political relations as well. I think there are opportunities, and going back as far as the 1950s with things like the Marshall Plan and the establishment of the OECD, there was a recognition that trade relations and political relations, and indeed security relations, all are tied together. Now, they're not necessarily direct ties, but constructive relations in one area tend to reinforce constructive relations in others. This morning, I'd also like to highlight that New Zealand is one of the leading countries in the region, and indeed, I would say in the world, in the critical area of food safety. And this is something that I think doesn't get as much attention in the United States as it should, but it needs to. New Zealand's exemplary commitment to safe, high-quality foods has helped to establish regional and global food safety standards, promote innovative technology, and enabled creative management of food supply chains. I was very happy to hear that your Prime Minister emphasized New Zealand's commitment to food safety when he spoke at the Boao Forum, which I actually happened to attend, in Hainan Island in China last month. And that was really a very interesting speech because few Americans realize what a large portion of the food we eat comes from abroad, comes from global supply chains. And we rely on this. We go to a drugstore, we go to a supermarket, and we assume that the food we eat is well inspected and is going to be safe. Well, a lot of work goes into making sure that it is well inspected and safe. And I think that countries that are increasingly important suppliers like China also, which provides incidentally a lot of the fish we eat here, and also a lot of other things like pharmaceutical products and others, that notion of safety of the supply chain is extremely important. And the Prime Minister emphasized this, pointing out that New Zealand has very high food safety standards backed up with world-class technology. And in this area, the future for New Zealand is in partnering with other people and other countries in our region to raise the standards as well. I also know firsthand this commitment is not just talk, but has inspired action to promote food safety as well. So when a woman in China goes to the store to buy her child food and it comes from New Zealand, you can have a very clear sense that this is a high quality product. And I think it's the same for people who go into a grocery store in the United States as well. And we like to believe and are making major efforts to ensure that our standards are high quality as well, so American consumers will have the confidence that whether the product comes from the United States or other countries, those standards will be very high. But that takes international cooperation, and New Zealand has really been a leader in strengthening that. It means inspections, and it means big countries like China, which are increasingly important exporters, have in their own interest to raise their standards, and the United States and New Zealand can be very helpful. With the United States and New Zealand being active partners in this overall area, we're particularly highly engaged in the World Bank's Global Food Safety Partnership, which was launched in the margins of APEC in 2011. And I was pleased to read recently that the prestigious Massey University is now collaborating with the World Bank to enhance this important program. So again, this is a partnership between our two countries, and the standards that have been set by New Zealand and have been promulgated elsewhere are extremely important parts of our relationship and make the world a better and safer place in many ways, and food security is one of them. I mentioned IPR protection and innovation, and another important area for trade and investment with New Zealand, cooperation with New Zealand in this area, is in this area because New Zealand does have a record and, in fact, a history of innovative contributions in the intellectual property realm. And we look forward to continue to working with New Zealand on improving the protection of intellectual property rights. Leading minds from New Zealand and from the United States universities are working very closely together in important areas of scientific research, including geothermal energy, food innovation, as I noted, electric smart grid technologies, and many others. So this is a relationship where very, very strong high degrees of cooperation in the area of innovation are extremely important to both sides. And if you have bright New Zealanders and bright Americans working on these projects, I think the chances of making progress are greater than if only one country did it, not in conjunction with others. I'm also confident that the 1,200 New Zealand students currently studying in the United States and the more than 3,000 American students studying in New Zealand will help propel cooperation between us in this area and many other areas of cooperation. In the region, the United States and New Zealand are cooperating to push forward an agenda that promotes open markets and an open, competitive economic philosophy. In addition to the very important TPP negotiations that I've mentioned, the U.S. and New Zealand each have a deep and abiding commitment to regional institutions, which include, of course, APEC, ASEAN, the East Asian Summit, and the Pacific Islands Forum. In fact, in APEC last year in Vladivostok, there was a great deal of collaboration between the United States and New Zealand in achieving the results that it was able to achieve, and we aim to do the same thing this year. It is through these regional organizations that other stakeholders, including most notably the private sector, which is critically important to this relationship, are empowered to contribute and to take action. Through these mechanisms, we can jointly address regional and global economic challenges. And I think both of us believe in the importance of energetic engagement by the private sector, and this is something that many of you here I know also believe in. That's why you're here. So we welcome the strong, robust, full-throated private sector role in this relationship. So let me conclude, because I know you have a very busy schedule. I just want to say again, thank you to Minister Grosser and his team and the New Zealanders who are here for this event. Our shared goal is to maintain stability and encourage cooperation and the peaceful resolution of disputes in the region, so the region can sustain and develop their economies. And this is another area in which New Zealand and the United States have worked together. We want to see open sea lanes. We want to see freedom of maritime movement. We want to see an area that does not find itself characterized by disputes over geographic areas where tensions build because of competing claims. Our view is these things should be resolved in a peaceful, constructive way without excessive pressure by one party on another. They should be done on the basis of international law, international norms, and peaceful cooperation to settle disputes and make sure that there is freedom of maritime movement in the region. Very important, because if you look at the Middle Ages, the Mediterranean was sort of the sea of commerce, if you will. Go back to Ulysses and you go back to the Venetian period, the Mediterranean was sort of the primary sea of commerce. In the 1950s through about 2000, it was the Atlantic. Increasingly, it's the Pacific. And to ensure that it maximizes its capabilities as a place for moving goods freely over the oceans, there should be freedom of navigation, and there should be a resolution of all the disputes that could interfere with that and create tensions in the region. We're also grateful to New Zealand for all the efforts it's making in this area. And on a broader scale, I think it's important to recognize that as we develop our economic relations in the region, amongst ourselves and with other countries in the region, that will create linkages that we believe will also enhance the prospects of political cooperation and security cooperation. Our countries share a history of strong values, a rich history. We've been partners for a long time in war and in peace. We all believe in a stable relationship and a prosperous relationship in the Pacific. And I, for one, and I know my colleagues in Washington, look forward continuing to work together with New Zealand, and we wish you the best for this dialogue. We know, given the number of people who will be, and the quality of the people who will be speaking, and the kinds of issues that you'll be discussing, this will lead to very important results in strengthening ties between us. So again, Tim, I want to thank you. I want to thank your team. I want to thank everyone who has come here, and I want to emphasize again, this is a relationship valued deeply by the United States now. It has been for many, many, many decades. It will be for many, many decades to come. And these are the kinds of friends and allies that the United States believes are important partners in building a world of the 21st century, which will lead to greater prosperity for New Zealanders, for Americans, and for the global economy. This sort of cooperation is needed if we're going to have growth in the global economy, and growth in the global economy in turn is beneficial to all of us. So I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank especially our guests who've come all the way up here from New Zealand for this event, and I wish you a good day. Thank you.